Dear. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Humanities Cafe. I want to start off by asking everybody to please mute your microphone so we don't have any feedback or anything like that. And it's an interactive program, so if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, toss it in the chat, and we'll get those answered for you. Again, welcome everybody to today's episode. I am super excited that you're all here and that we have such amazing guests today. Literature is often broken down into categories called genres, right? And there's several of them. And two of the most widely recognized genres are fiction and nonfiction. Fiction, which is literature that consists of imaginative, made-up stories intended to entertain, and nonfiction, which is literature that represents factual information and accounts with an intent to educate and inform the reader. So our guests today are two gentlemen who have managed to bridge the two genres in a unique way. Writing stories that both educate and entertain, while at the same time bridging different generations and different cultures. Their vast collections of work bring readers together in a way that resembles the traditional indigenous way of teaching through storytelling. And they are both remarkable storytellers, for sure. I'm both honored and delighted to welcome today two authors for which I personally have great respect and admiration, Willliam Kent Krueger and Kent Nerburn, the Kents, as we refer to them. Gentlemen, please tell us a little bit about yourselves. Who are the Kents? Kent Krueger, do you want to go first?
Sure. Who is this Kent?
Yeah.
A guy who really admires the work of the other Kent, to begin with. So I am probably best known as the author of the, I love saying this, New York Times best-selling Cork O'Connor mystery series. For those unfamiliar with my work, I set that series in the Great North Woods of Minnesota. My protagonist, Cork O'Connor, is a man of mixed heritage. He's part Irish-American and he's part Ojibwe Anishinaabe. Because of that mixture in his heritage, and largely because of the area in which I've chosen to set my work, a lot of the stories that I write come from issues that rise out of the interface of those two cultures, white and Ojibwe. So I've written about Indian gaming casinos and the effect that that's had on both the Ojibwe community and the surrounding white community. I've written about the influx of the drug and the gang cultures on the reservation. I've written about the really tragic situation that exists here in the Twin Cities and in many of the large metropolitan areas that have a significant Native population that deals with the sexual trafficking of vulnerable Native women and children. Always at some level in my work, I try to deal with the question of racial prejudice. So that's my Cork O'Connor series. I have written a number of standalones set in southern Minnesota that deal with a lot of the issues that the Dakota people and the white population down there for generations historically have had to deal with.
And Kent Nerburn, what have you been up to? What do we need to know about Kent Nerburn?
Well, let's see, where do we dig into this? Got a dog barking there. Looks like that's my friend John Fury, I think. All right, well, maybe that was a commentary. There's always a critic out there, you know. So no, anyway, I'm an accidental writer. I was actually training in sculpture, trained to be a sculptor. I got my doctorate in religion and art. Always been a believer in the spiritual dimension of life and trying to give voice to it. And someone once called me a guerrilla theologian, which, you know, if they spell gorilla correctly, I'll take it. But that was, you know, I try to deal with spirituality as a sense of mystery in the world, you know, not necessarily sectarian things, but I wanted to always speak to the mystery in life and the larger truths that are behind things. I stumbled into native writing when I went to work on the Red Lake Ojibwe Reservation in northern Minnesota and set up an oral history program up there. And in the course of that time, I discovered really two fundamental truths that that guided me. And one was that there have been, like Kent talks about the crucial issues in the Native world and the lack of our understanding of the Native experience and the way it's been expunged from our historical narrative. And that I think we're addressing in some way these days where there's some correctives going on. But on my part, what fascinated me more were the core values and beliefs that were beneath the sort of cultural detritus very often of what's been left of the Native people because of what we've done through acculturation and extinction and assimilation. And so my works have always been an attempt to try to give voice to those values. I make it very clear, and I think the reason I've been able to do things is I do not in any way claim Indian heritage. And nor am I trying to traffic in Indian themes for fun and profit. I just think there are some core values, core beliefs that as the elder cultures on this land, the rest of us need to know. So I've tried to write towards that issue in many different ways. I'm best known probably for the trilogy of Neither Wolf Nor Dog, The Wolf at Twilight, and Gorilla Sang to the Buffalo. But I've also done a large historical work on Chief Joseph and the Flight of the Nez Perce. I've done more homiletic books as well, books that are books I call of consolation, where I'm trying to speak to people who have that fundamental feeling of I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, and trying to tell them there is a place to understand the world from your point of view. And lately, my last book, this one, Lone Dog Road, is really what I call my elder book. You reach that point in life where, as the Native people say, there are 4 seasons, and the one in the 4th season is the only one who has seen the 3 previous seasons. And though there's uniqueness to all of our individual experiences and cultural experiences, there are some things that are common to the wisdom that comes from age. And I've tried to write the book that I thought I needed to write to give voice to the many different points of view and many different types of spirituality that I have found important in my journeys. And I wanted to set it in the state that I love, South Dakota, which I did.
Well, I have some questions. I'm going to pick on each of you individually in a little bit, but for both of you, I have some common questions, I guess. The first big one for me is, where do you find the inspiration for the books you write?
Well, for me, it depends on the kind of book I'm going to write. So I write a mystery series, and that deals significantly with the culture of the Anishinaabe. And so many of the stories in that series come from issues that my friends in the Native community have made me aware of that are significant to the Native people, and that through my work I've tried to make what is essentially a white reading population more broadly aware of. And so the inspiration often comes from the suggestions of my friends in the Native community. And I am so grateful to them for their generosity in that regard. My standalone novels, Ordinary Grace, This Tender Land, The River We Remember, have come from a different place. They are more personal stories that in some cases I've wanted to tell since I was, pretty young kid, and finally got around to it. So the inspirations, and I believe this as well, Stacy. If you're once you accept that you're one of the storytellers, I think it's like you open a door to yourself, and stories start coming at you from all directions. They come from places you would expect. They come from places you would never expect. And so for me, always, the question is not, what am I going to write this time? Do I have an idea? It's of the many ideas that I have, the many inspirations that I have, which one right now can I spend a year or a year and a half with and still be excited and compelled in the writing?
Well, and in my case, I mean, Kent makes brings up a very crucial thing. You're spending a year or 6 months or 2 years, or in case of the Chief Joseph book of mine, 4 years with a subject, and you live in that world. And so you'd best choose carefully, not only for your own mental health, but for the authenticity of what you're trying to say. And in my case, I sort of work by epiphany. When a moment finds me, I'll hold on to it, and it may not come to fruition for for a long period. I mean, there have been situations like in The Wolf at Twilight, a book I never expected to write, which was the second in the trilogy that was really about the boarding school experience. It came from an encounter I had with a Lakota. It was actually, no, he was an Ojibwe elder, Dakota elder, I believe, on the Spirit Lake Reservation outside of Devil's Lake, where I saw him in an old cafe, in an old beaten up cafe after I'd gone and visited Fort Totten, and was kind of haunted by the presence of the boarding school experience that had taken place in Fort Totten, which had been converted at one point from a fort to a boarding school. And I'd been allowed to wander around there alone and just take it in. And it was a deeply haunting experience. And I went down into the town of Devil's Lake or went down into the town of Spirit Lake, actually. And there was this little concrete cafe. And I went in there. There was a native man in there. And this man he was well into his 80s, I think. And I asked him quite uncharacteristically if I could sit down with him. And he said yes. And in the course of our conversation, I asked him if he'd gone to the boarding school. And he said, oh, yeah, I went there. I learned good English. I learned good Christian, but I'm no longer myself. I'm somebody else. That was the frame. At that point, I had something. It wasn't necessarily a story, but it was an impulse. It was an imperative. It was a moral imperative to tell that story. And that was a typical example of where my work comes from. Unlike other Kent, who's supremely disciplined, I work in sort of mental and emotional chaos. I wait for something to come to the surface. And sometimes that it's very inefficient, but usually when something does come out, it means I can write about it honestly and with authenticity. So I really work by epiphany, and it doesn't matter what it is or where it comes. If I think it's something that I can speak to and give that year of my life to, I'll do it. But if I don't, my cutting room floor, I'm sure every writer's cutting room floor is, it's piled knee high with things that you started, but they never went anywhere. I need to know when I start that this is something that I care enough about to take it through to the end.
Interesting. So as I refer to in the introduction, you guys have both the ability to entertain us, but also to teach us about a wide variety of subjects, including the Upper Midwest and Native culture in particular. So what does the Upper Midwest, and particularly Minnesota, mean to you personally?
Go, Kent.
I've answered first, Kent. Kent
okay.
N, you go.
Kent N goes, well, actually, I would prefer to answer what the Dakotas mean to me, but I'll start with Minnesota. I'm a born and raised Minnesotan, and I consider us, Midwest. I don't consider South Dakota Midwest. I consider the Dakotas Western and leaning to the West. The second you get into the edge of the prairies, you're leaning to the West, and you can feel the spiritually tectonic pull of the West. In Minnesota, I've never felt that. Minnesota, it seems like this is the place where people came and stopped and settled and dug in. I was born and raised in the southern part of Minnesota, which is deciduous trees, and where Kent and I both live now. And but in moving to northern Minnesota, I had expected to always be fascinated by the great, powerful, undeniable force of Lake Superior and the lakes and woods country. But I found myself drawn to the emptiness and what I call the delicious bleakness of the northwest corner of Minnesota, which pulled me into the Dakotas. So I love Minnesota as a home, and it is definitely my psychological home. But spiritually, the reason I set my books in the Dakotas and West is because I'm drawn to the West. So in that way, maybe, it's safe to say that my roots are in Minnesota, but the branches of my tree have moved in other directions.
You're a poet even when you talk, Kent. I spent a lot of my youth growing up in the Midwest in various places, and then I left. But I'm a firm believer that once the Midwest sets a hook in your heart, it'll always pull you back, and it certainly did for me. So I've lived in Minnesota now for 45 years, and I was a nomad, a very nomadic family. I came from And then in all of the years we moved, I never really felt like I had a home. No place that I ever felt like was my home or that I called home. But honest to God, the minute we set foot in Minnesota, my wife and I knew I'd found home. I knew I'd come home. And so all of my writing really is kind of a Valentine to this Minnesota adopted home of mine. I've always loved the writing of John Steinbeck, particularly the stories that he sets in the Salinas Valley area, because his love of that place is so evident on every line that he writes, and that's how I've tried to approach Minnesota. I draw infinite inspiration from the heartland. I draw infinite inspiration from the kind of people who live here. But Minnesota is an interesting place in that there are many different Minnesotas. And as Kent has pointed out, here down in southern Minnesota, very Midwest sensibility here. But the farther north you go, the more things change. And you've got the Iron Range, where there's a particular kind of cultural potpourri there. If you go over to the Arrowhead, a very different kind of an area. If you move west, again, a different kind of culture at work, northwest. So to talk about Minnesota as a whole is a very difficult thing to do. That part of Minnesota that I write about is what has drawn me. When I first moved here many years ago, in the summer, we began doing what every Twin Cities person does in the summer. We began vacationing up north. We began spending a portion of every summer at a YMCA camp north of Ely, a place called Camp de Nord, which is literally across the road from the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And when I discovered that marvelous territory, I knew this is where I want to set my work. This is what I want to write about. So I began the Cork O'Connor series there. Then with my standalones, I have returned to southern Minnesota, to the Midwest, that speaks to my heart in a different way.
Can I jump in there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, when Kent talks, the thing is, his works are a love affair with Minnesota. I don't think saying a Valentine that sounds too, is too mawkish. But I think his readers feel the love that he has for this land. And in my case, I've always been a wanderer, a spiritual wanderer and a physical wanderer. And in that way, my works are always a search for home. And I've never had that, it's the great American conundrum, and one of the reasons why I think Native people fascinate me, because their sense of home and place is so fundamental to who they are. And what I heard myself saying about, that about going out to the Dakotas and to the West, it's that not I don't write love affairs to the place I'm from. I write love affairs to the wandering. And that wandering has become, it's become the essence of my work. It's become road novels. I mean, and whether, you talk about John Steinbeck, there is no one who is a better example of both road novels and a love of a certain place. So he is a model for all of us, I think. So anyway, that's all just mine. I feel myself more as a wanderer, and I admire Kent's love of this place. I remember when we first got together, when we moved back here, I was anguishing about, how do I live here? What's it like? I'm from here, it's home, but it's not home anymore. And he just sort of said, calm down, everything will be fine. And he was right. So,
Well, it's particularly interesting to me is someone who moved here from the East Coast. Is the stereotype of upper Midwesterners and a desire to counterbalance that stereotype in the back of your mind when you write? Is it a conscious effort on your part, or how does that happen? Because your characters in your books are so relatable. Even, no matter where you're from in this, spectrum of places in the United States or the world, you can relate to those characters, and they're not those stereotypical, oh shucks kind of Midwestern people. They're relatable and they're real people. Is that something in the back of your mind, or how does that come about? Kent Krueger?
Well, I don't think about that at all when I'm writing characters who have a Euro history, a Euro ancestry. I think about it a lot when I'm writing about the Native population, because there are still so many tragic stereotypes out there of what it means to be Native or what it means to be Indian. And so I work very hard to create characters who feel natural to me with their culture, in their environment, and as much as I can dispel the myths, good and bad, that people have spun about our Native brothers and sisters.
Right. In my case, I I love Midwesterners. They drive me crazy because I is one, and that. But I mean, from the time I was young, and even now, you, well, maybe I shouldn't say this because it's pushing the envelope, but it was a place where you could leave your car door unlocked,
Mhm.
doors open, and people would help you. I mean, I loved the excitement of living on the West Coast, which I did for a lot of years, but people would stop if you had trouble with your car and say, I'll jump your car for $5. And in Minnesota, they call their neighbors and they come out and they lift your car out of the ditch and get you moving. And I've loved the Midwesterners. I love their authenticity. Sometimes the the lack of creative vision, the sense of stolid, we're rooted here, God damn it, don't mess with us, gets in the way of my perception. But I also think one thing that really is wonderful about the Midwesterners, when I look at what I'm proudest of, it's people like Eugene Debs, Eugene McCarthy, Paul Wellstone, these people that fought for the little guy, fought for the ordinary person. And whenever I start, quibbling about the culture here, about being stuck in the middle, which sometimes is how it feels, I look at these people that had a moral force to the way that they lived and caring about the world. And that infuses life here. And I'm really proud to be part of that. So that's the part of the Midwest that I really believe in. I mean, flyover country, we all know about that. Anyone who's not living on one of the coasts lives in flyover country. And flyover country is different in Montana, it's different in Indiana, it's different in Minnesota. But, Minnesota has a unique place being the headwaters of the Mississippi, where things actually start, where there's different, you know, you've got different continental divides going different ways. You're right on the edge of the pines and the prairies. I mean, it's a very unique place. And so as you dig into its uniqueness, and as you start to also hopefully go deep enough to start seeing the authentic indigenous experience here, which comes close to the surface here, much more so than in many places, uh, it's a very special and unique place, and I'm very proud of it.
You know, I spent a lot of years growing up in the Midwest, and so much of my moral compass was shaped in those years, and the sort of the ethical guidelines by which I live. Um, I love the fact that Minnesotans, as Kent pointed out, and I think still is basically true, we're a pretty trustworthy bunch of people.
Pretty trustworthy.
Our hearts are always in the right place. I think we're always trying to do the right thing. Um, you know, when I deal with people in New York, my editors, for example, they love Midwest writers because deadlines mean something to Midwest writers. I have an agent who operates out of the Midwest, Chicago, and everybody that I've talked to in New York who deals with my agent Danielle loves dealing with her because she's very Midwestern in her approach, which means she's very gracious, very decent, and incredibly persistent. And she always gets what she wants in the end, but she does it in a very Midwestern sort of a way.
So, both of you are master storytellers, and as I mentioned, the story is key to the native way of teaching. So, when writing about Indigenous people and Indigenous culture, what I think I know the answers to this, but what resources are most important to you? Is it research? Is it talking to people? It is a little of everything. How do you go about that?
Kent, I'm going to let you dive into this one because I think in talking with you and knowing your work, I just so admire the depth of the research and the breadth of your experience with Native folks. So fire away.
Well, for me, thank you for the kind words. Hopefully, the Native people would say the same. But for me, uh, it's about empathy. Uh,
Mm.
I had a strange background growing up. that takes far too long to explain, but I'll give you a quick thumbnail that my father was a director of disaster for the American Red Cross here in Minneapolis. And as a child, he would go out to disasters and be sent out to disasters anytime in the middle of the night. He got the same calls that the police did. And so I'd be ripped out of my bed in the middle of the night and taken to things like drownings, fires where there were just human suffering. I mean, my favorite story, dark favorite story, was sitting on the shore of Cedar Lake at 2 in the morning while they when they were out dragging for the body of a young boy. And there was only me there. My dad was over somewhere else. And on the other side of the beach was the mother sitting there huddled in a blanket. And they were going back and forth with the motor just putting along. And all of a sudden, they had their flashlights on the water. And all of a sudden, they say, "We got something." And they pull up the body of the boy. He's bloated and blue. And the scream from the mother coming across was like something I will never forget. So, okay, we get done, we pack up and we go home, and I get into bed, wake up the next morning, and I go, geez, I got to go to junior high. I wonder if Cindy Waring's going to think I'm cool. I wonder if my belt is as good as Gary Zwig's belt, you know. And I said to myself, my life is not important. It is not as important as this. And so baked into my cultural or psychological DNA was listening, always listening. And so I became a listener and a watcher. Listen for the spaces in conversations, watch the twitches of the eye. Everything is just close observation, which is something the Native people understand. And that's where I tend to start my stories. It's what I see. That man I talked about in the cafe, hearing in the tone in his voice, the wistfulness when he said, I'm no longer myself. There his character starts to build out. And then I try to move into them empathetically and find their voice. And that's something that, that Kent, I know, believes in, getting the voice of the person correctly. If you can hear them when you're talking, if you become them when you're writing, that character builds itself. It grows. It interacts with the world, and you are that character. But at the same time, that character has been established as someone else from whatever source point you have, and that character just builds out. Once I get my story pretty well shaped out, I'll be moving along, and if I don't know where I'm going, if I don't know a word, like doing a lot of in Lone Dog Road, did a lot of Lakota, there would be a word that I know I needed, a concept that I know I needed, and then I'd go back to people. I'd go to the works of someone like Joseph Marshall. I'd go to my friends, my Lakota friends or Dakota friends, and they wouldn't always tell you if you're right, but they'll certainly tell you if you're wrong. So, yeah, for me, research was always after the fact. The first impulse is the capacity for empathy with the character that I'm trying to create.
Okay. So now I'm gonna kind of focus. I'm gonna pick on you first, Kent Krueger. So you have 21 novels in the Cork series, technically four standalones, and inclusion in a number of collections and anthologies. So how did this all start? How was Hemingway in your formative years, and the Count of Monte Cristo? Those two things in particular.
Well, I can tell you've done your research.
I'm a fan, so
that's pretty much my bio there. So I don't know. I don't know how the other Kent it came to being a storyteller. For me, there was never a time I didn't want to be a storyteller or a practitioner of the creation of stories. My first short story was a short story in the 3rd grade. It was called The Walking Dictionary. I got to tell folks this. My father was a high school English teacher. When I was a kid, he was always storming around the house ranting something like, "Nobody uses dictionaries enough. Nobody uses dictionaries enough." So in the 3rd grade, I wrote a short story called The Walking Dictionary, which was in fact about a dictionary that didn't think it was being used enough. It magically sprouted legs so that it could toddle off into the world and go to the people that needed it. My 3rd grade teacher went gaga over that story. My folks oohed and awed over that story. I swear to you, Stacy, in the 3rd grade, I knew I was destined to be a storyteller.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Hemingway came into my life as a result of my father as well. When I was 18, he insisted I read Hemingway, and I fell madly in love with the guy and loved his work. And at 18, tried to emulate Hemingway in many, many ways. For the very early part of my journey as a writer, I tried to write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway might have written it. But I have outgrown Hemingway and over the years discovered who I am as a writer and the voice that feels comfortable for me. But it started a very long time ago. I didn't publish my first novel, Iron Lake, first in the Cork O'Connor series, until I was 48 years old. So I served a very long apprenticeship. But I was always writing in those years. Every morning, 7 days a week, I would get up and write. And eventually I discovered the kinds of stories that, as I used to tell my students, the kind of stories I was meant to write and the kind of writer I was always meant to be.
So in 2024, I think it was, you gave a commencement. You received your honorary doctorate from.
I am Dr. Krueger now.
Dr. Krueger. So from Hamline University, and in your commencement address, you alluded to your experience at Stanford. So can you tell us about Stanford and how that kind of launched your path into being a writer in a unique kind of way?
Yeah, I matriculated to Stanford University in the fall of 1969. This was deep in the Vietnam War, a conflict that so divided our nation. It divided communities, it divided families. Stanford had a relationship with an organization called the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, whose primary source of income at that point in time was research into military weaponry. And there were a lot of us at Stanford that felt that was an inappropriate relationship with an institution like Stanford to maintain, particularly at that point in history. So we petitioned the board of directors, the trustees to sever the relationship. We petitioned the administration. We marched, we demonstrated. Nobody listened to us because, of course, there were huge sums of money involved. So finally, in frustration, a group of us one day marched into the administration building and occupied it. The president of the university, a pretty reasonable guy named Richard Lyman, vacated the building and we took it over. That evening, about 8 o'clock, we had a band come in and we held a dance where typically we would have registered for classes. At midnight, the band packed up and took off, and those of us who were going to occupy the building rolled out our sleeping bags and went to sleep. Huge tactical error. Because at 1 a.m., the Palo Alto riot squad in full riot gear swept through and arrested those of us who were in the building. I was on a full scholarship to Stanford. It evaporated and I had to leave. But I have never regretted that action, nor have I tried to turn away from the consequences. Because in the end, it was a pretty good thing. I happened to, just before that occupation, I happened to meet the woman who eventually I married and still married to after 52 years. When I left, I embarked on essentially the Hemingway version of an education. I worked lots of, rough and tumble jobs. I logged timber for a while. I worked construction for many, many years. And in the process, I met the kind of people I would never have met at Stanford University and learned the kinds of things I would never have learned from a college textbook. And that to this day really underlies my understanding of what it is to be human in all of its iterations. And honestly, Stacy, I have always found it far more interesting to say that I was kicked out of Stanford than that I graduated from the place.
Well, I've got to jump into that because I have my Stanford story as well.
Okay.
Here's where the twain no longer met or parted or became the same. I'm not even sure which, but I also went to Stanford and had a sort of.
Wait, when were you there, Kent?
I think it was 69 to 70, something like that. Very close to the same time you were.
That's pretty much when I was there.
But my experience was equally as tawdry, but a little bit different. I'd come out of the University of Minnesota, and I loved going to school at the University of Minnesota. But my life here was, Bob Dylan hunching down the railroad track with my hands in my pockets, smoking dope in basements, listening to blues records with a single light bulb, and it was very authentic. It felt real. I got out to Palo Alto, and the culture shock was so great.
Yeah.
But from living essentially in a psychological and spiritual basement to going into the light of Palo Alto and Stanford. So in an attempt, God, it's so ridiculous. In an attempt to claim some sort of an identity, God, I actually got a sheet, okay? I cut a hole in the sheet. I put the sheet over my head. I tucked it into my pants, and I had a rope around my waist with a wooden bowl on a belt because I figured, you don't need more than one bowl to live in the life. In this bourgeois world, we don't need this kind of thing. And I'd been taken to into the graduate program in religious studies and humanities, which was just getting started. And it was a zoo theory on their part. They picked 5 different people that were going to be their stars. Well, I was the distaff one. And obviously, from the way I described myself, I didn't go over well. So anyway, I got them to let me take a course in creative writing from Nancy Packer, I believe it was. And she took me aside at one point and said, well, these people are training to be real writers. And oh, okay, well, it was one of those stabs in the heart. But I left Stanford. I convinced them to let me go to Germany to learn German rather than being in a language lab all summer. In the course of that, I fell in love with sculpture. I fell in love with the honest spirituality of these farmer artists. And instead of studying religion as theories of soteriology, these were people trying to anguish their belief into a form. So I came back to Stanford and said, I'd like to become a wood carver. And they said, we think you're having a nervous breakdown. You should take the year off. I took the year off and I never went back. So that's how Stanford came into and left my life. And it was, to this day, I think, what a fool. And more than that, I think, oh, my poor parents, here's this guy on a free ride, a Danforth Fellowship, 4 years free at any graduate school he wants, and he's going to go be a wood carver. And my dad and mom lived for education. Wherever they are, I apologize to them every day. It's good literature, but bad reality, I guess. That's just the way it was.
Kent, I swear I saw you walking around the campus in your sheet and with your bowl, and I just thought you were a nutcase.
Well, guess what? You were right. Oh, just a fool with an idea. That's all I can say.
Well, it sounds like we have Stanford to thank. So I mean, let's just toss that out there. So Kent, I want to talk about, you have your
Which
standalone.
Kent?
Oh, Kent Krueger, sorry. See, I knew I was going to do that. So you have the
Kent Myers
standalone.
might answer. If we get
I'm
lucky.
sorry?
Maybe Kent Myers might answer if we get lucky.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
oh,
We should get 3 Kents going.
We'll make this a blanket Kent statement. So Kent Krueger, you have your standalones and you have your Cork O'Connor series. Are your standalones more challenging to write than those in your Cork series? And how does your approach to writing them differ?
Well, let's talk about the approach, because I typically have approached them very differently. The Cork O'Connor series, those are all essentially mysteries. And a mystery, as I tell audiences, a mystery is a very tightly woven fabric of storytelling. Every element depends so significantly on the placement of every other element. And I think that the success of a mystery depends largely on the timing of the reveals, when you give the reader the clues that are going to be necessary to solving the mystery at the heart of the story. So traditionally, when I've written a Cork O'Connor story, I have thought it through as completely as I can before I ever put my fingers to the keyboard. At the end of that thinking process, which can go on weeks or sometimes has even gone on months, I know how the story begins, I know how it ends, I know who did what to whom and why, I know the themes I want to weave through the story, I know where I'm going to plant my red herrings. And a mystery is an intellectual construct. It's a puzzle you create in your head. And the whole time you're trying to write that piece, the thing that's forefront in your thinking is how to keep all those puzzle pieces fitted perfectly together. My standalones don't come from my head, they come from my heart. And I've always wanted a process that would allow the reader to feel like I'm telling you the story straight from my own heart. So for those novels, I have never worked from an outline. I just had a general sense of the kind of story I would tell. And then I have waded into the story and allowed it to reveal itself to me and the characters along with it very different kind of creative process, but so remarkable in so many ways. And in the end, so surprising in the place I always come to at the end of a story.
So I think looking back at your vast collection of work, has there ever been a time where you were writing a standalone novel and a quirk book at the same time? And then how do you find a balance or decide what to write about every day? Because you do write every day.
7 days a week. In the morning. If there's anybody out there who is an aspiring writer, I have 2 pieces of advice for you. The first is this: write every single day. The second is this: marry somebody with a good job. Let's see, what was the question, Stacy? Okay, what was the question?
Like, have you ever written a quirk book and a standalone at the same time? And how do you keep that all straight?
I have never worked in the way where, in the morning I would work on a quirk book and in the afternoon I would work on a standalone manuscript, but I usually compose them across the same period of time. So when I'm writing a manuscript for the Cork O'Connor series, there are certain natural stopping points. So when I finish the first draft, I try to set it aside for a while so that when I come back to it for the first round of revisions, it's with a fresh eye. And then while I have set that aside, I would work on the standalone. Then when I sent that Cork manuscript to my agent to read, she would have it for weeks. I would work on a standalone. Then it would go to my editor while he or she had it. I would work on the standalone. And then that way, typically I'm able to turn in a couple of Cork O'Connor manuscripts while I'm creating one of my standalones.
Wow. It fascinates me that because I'm like, does he wake up and feel like it's a quirky kind of day today? Or,
a quirky kind of day. I love that.
What kind of day is it today? So Kent Nerburn, I'm gonna shift over to you now. We know that you started out as a sculptor, and your path to becoming a writer, because you've always wanted to be a writer, but what and you told us a little bit about your background, but what tell us about your years on the Red Lake Reservation in Project Preserve and what you came to learn there, how that affected your path as a writer.
Well, like I said early on, it changed my outlook from sculpting to writing. I ended up giving up sculpture after having spent my time on the reservation because I saw that I happened to be the right person at the right time, able to tell the stories that needed to be told. The oral history project that we put together that actually had originally, I took over the job from Bob Troyer, who was David Troyer's dad, and Tony Troyer's. But he had given it up, and as teaching history as a traditional, he'd done it as a traditional way of teaching and trying to get the students to read historical documents. And because of my background and wanting other people's voices to be heard, I said, let's do it as an oral history project. And I proposed it to the board. They accepted that. So I took the students out onto the reservation, and we'd bring baskets of food to the people. I took the kids to the Elderly Nutrition Center to work with the elders. I took them to BSU, where my wife was teaching, Bemidji State, to take classes. I taught them as much. I gave them the words of other Native people, and I pretty much got out of the way as best I could. So in the elders, because A Blind Pig and an Acorn, it was where I stumbled on the idea of bringing kids to the elders. So suddenly the elders were enfranchised to do what they always had been trained, what should be their rightful task, which is to teach the children. So here was this, so earnest, well-meaning white guy who brings the students to them. And they loved me for doing that. I love the kids love me, and I don't use that word lightly. There was my love affair. And it was what I saw, like I said, was core values. I saw a different understanding of family than I had, where the kids would say, oh, I'm going to my auntie's. I didn't go home last night. I went to my auntie's, and I'd find out that I'd say, well, what was that about? And I'd learned that the auntie was like another mother. I saw people who cared more about giving respect than about getting respect, I saw people that had a fundament of spirituality in everything that they did, no matter how, you know, how much in the world of vulgarity and profanity they would. When the drum came out, everyone went to it with a sense of prayerful acknowledgement. I saw all of these values, and they fit perfectly with the kind of search for a non-sectarian spirituality that was that I had been seeking my entire life. And you mentioned the storytelling. When I would doing the oral history project, at one point, a guy that I took them out to talk to, the Native people love stories are a way of teaching. Stories are, they're not necessarily analogy. They're not metaphor. They really believe in the power of these stories to teach. And he said to me when I was collecting things, he said, always teach my stories because stories lodge deep in the heart. And boy, that you could put that on my forehead, put that on my gravestone. So at that point, a guy who was, oh, I was always turgid and confused when trying to be an intellectual. And I'd actually one of my heroes when I was in college was Norman Mailer because he was able to be smart without being an intellectual. And I said, there is a route there. And so when I got working with the Native people and I realized the storytelling was a route that worked for me, I became a storyteller. And everything just sort of fell into place. And to this day, when I sit down to write or when I go out and talk, if I if I'm on my game, I'm telling stories. If I'm off my game, I'm trying to philosophize. So stories have saved me, and stories have been, I mean, I think they're key to our understanding of humanity because it's what we all share, it's what we all live. So that's why stories mean something to me and why Red Lake meant something to me.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. Could I
Go
just
ahead.
add something here?
Sure.
Um, I have always believed that, we think of stories as entertainment, but stories can do so much more. They can enlighten us, they can encourage us, they can inspire us, and they can give us hope. As I tell audiences, I have come to believe that stories are every bit as important to us as breathing.
Mhm. Well, I have as you can about imagine, I have about 100 more questions, but we only have a few more minutes. So, Kent Nerburn, you had three collections, I believe, several nonfiction books, the Dan trilogy, as I refer to it, and then now the standalone book, Lone Dog Road. It's right there. The whole stack right there is you got. That's my shrine to the two of you. But in the Dan trilogy, were any of those three stories more difficult to write than the others, and in what way?
Probably the first one, neither wolf nor dog, because I didn't quite know what I was doing. I knew I was trying to give people, non-native people, an understanding of the native experience, and I knew I was trying to be authentic to the native voice and let the native people speak authentically in that. I didn't know where the line between fiction and nonfiction was. I didn't, I had a protagonist based on a man who didn't want to be known, didn't want his story told, but said, use me to tell the story, the native story, but don't attach it to me. Don't let anyone find me. It was all very confused. And I, I didn't know what I had done. By the time I got done with it, I had realized, and you don't never know what you've done until your audience comes back to you, and they will tell you whether you've done something good or whether you've done something poorly or whether it works or it doesn't. And that was when I realized that book, that by keeping my own identity and walking people into the native world and handing them over to the native people, essentially an oral history uh, wrapped in a narrative, which really was kind of based on a gospel narrative, if you look at the form, because I was really trained in religious art. And that, by the way, parenthetically, is another place where the essence of story comes in. Story is the way that you learn the Christian story. It's the way the Buddhists teach. It it's the way that people communicate spiritual truth. So I had found a story model, and I had found a book, a way of telling the story that worked for people. When I got to the other two books, I knew what I was doing. I knew how to carry it for. I knew what I had to deal with. The one man who said, He lost his, he was no longer himself. That became the boarding school one. And the next one, I said, I'll take you as far as I can into the spirituality of Native people, just so you can peer over the edge and see there's something here bigger than we understand, but I'm not going there. So it was the first one that was the hardest. After that, it was just finding the same voice was the only difficulty with the second two.
You just alluded to something that I wanted to ask you about in Lone Dog Road, your most recent book, because you set yourself in that book as the narrator and a character in the trilogy.
Right.
And so why did you do that? And then how did that impact your writing of Lone Dog Road?
Oh, that's the core question of my own literary identity. That someone in Michigan State once said to me that God, I had the term on the tip of my tongue for what I do as autoethnography, dropping myself into a story and impacting the story and finding my way around, and that telling the story as a participant, and that's what I did in those books. But I always felt like I was intruding a little too much. In the first one, uh, at the Minnesota Book Awards, some guy came up to me and said, there's only one false note in that book, and neither wolf nor dog. And I said, well, what's that? He said, you make yourself too dumb. And I thought, okay, but I said I had to be. I'm an observer. So as we went through the three books, I tried to integrate myself with authenticity, but without being dominant. It was never supposed to be my book, but I wanted to tell a book, especially in this season where there's so much anger and compartmentalizing of belief and feelings about life. I wanted to tell a story without a narrator, an outside narrator. I wanted each of the people to be the narrators. It was to be a book of sequential empathies. I want you to understand each of these characters. I want them to speak in their own voice. I want them to speak intimately and have each of their stories. It's not that they tell part of a story, it's that as they go along, the story is unfolded through each of them. And they don't know what's happening. We as readers don't know what's happening. But I didn't know whether the book worked. And luckily, someone like other Kent looked at it and said, it's a good book. You did okay. I had no idea whether I had a handle on this or not. But the essence of it was that only these are like oral histories, except they're fictional narratives. So each of the people tells a story. And I wanted to get myself out of the way. I've always been too present in my mind in some of my narrations. So that was really the purpose. And that's why I call it my elder book, because it's me letting the voices of other people speak without me intruding.
I just want to set the record straight here. I didn't tell Kent that it was that he did okay. I told him it was a stunning achievement.
You're an easy mark. You're like a golden retriever. You're happy to be happy to pet someone. I like it. Yeah. No, actually, it was Kent and my wife were the only two that I didn't have any idea what I had, but I know I trust his eye and I trust my wife's eye, and so that made it good because I truly, I've never been in that situation before where I had no idea whether this was any good or not. And at this stage in my life, you'd think you'd have a better handle on things, but I just wanted to stretch myself, and I did, and so far so good.
Yeah, it's amazing, amazing. So we only have a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask you both now. You're both on the hot seat. What do you most hope readers will take away from your most recent, well, not for just the most recent books, but all of your books, in particular, your most recent work? Kent Krueger, I'm going to pick on you. Oh, okay. Kent Nerburn, go ahead.
Time to give it to Ken. Give it to other Kent.
Whenever I'm asked what it is that I write about, my response is this: I simply write about the importance of hope. Mm-hmm. I've always believed that as long as we don't abandon hope, we're going to find our way home. And so in the end, that's what I try to write, are stories about people who go through all kinds of struggles, challenges, overcome all kinds of obstacles. But as long as they hold to hope, in the end, things turn out all right. It is, maybe it's a mythic approach to storytelling, but it's in terms of my own approach to life, it's absolutely what I believe.
Okay, my turn. And how much do I have? 30 seconds?
Oh, no, we got a couple minutes yet.
Oh, okay, look out there. There we go. No, I believe in what I want my work to do is teach people. I look at myself as a teacher. I value teachers above everything else in the world. And I try to embed knowledge in story. What I want people to come out of it with is a feeling that we have all have our unique lives, and none of us in some ways understands what other people go through, but in other ways, we all want to be loved. We want more happiness than sadness in our lives. We want our children to do well. So this commonality of the human experience is leavened with the individuality of our own particular lives. And I want people to believe in the rights of other people to have different ways of seeing, and to enter into other ways of seeing, and to come out of it with a sense that life is, you bend your knee before the mystery of life. I mean, that's kind of where my bottom line is. If my books help people bend their knee towards the mystery of life and get out of the practicality and see that there's a depth in all of our experiences, I've done my job. And that's all I want to do, is to help people, open their minds and hearts.
Well, and I think a combination, I think I speak for a lot of us when I say a combination of hope and from your perspective, Kent Krueger, and the teachings in compassion and empathy, Kent Nerburn, that you actually both include in your stories, is something that we all need right now. So thank you so much for the work that you do. I have several other questions, but I'll save those for when we speak again. I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. We are running out of time. Does anybody have any questions that they want to, a quick question they want to ask the authors? Nobody? Okay. Well, I was going to ask you if you had any works in anything in the works, which I kind of know that one of you has a book coming out next year, Kent Krueger. But we'll save that again for a future conversation. If you are all able to join us for the Festival of Books at the end of the month here, you'll get to hear these two talk again. It's going to be great. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're going to be back next week. Our cafe topic next week, we'll be speaking with Tanya Israel, whose book is entitled Facing the Fracture: How to Navigate the Challenges of Living in a Divided Nation. She's going to talk to us about the importance of going beyond just conversation to meaningful engagement and a healthy well-being in today's mixed up society and everything that's going on. So I hope you'll be able to join us next Thursday for another episode of Humanities Cafe. I really hope you can join us in Spearfish at the end of the month. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week, the rest of the summertime, and we hope to see you soon. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. It's been an honor and a pleasure. I can't wait to hear you speak again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stacy. Kent, always a delight.
You always trust someone named Kent.
There you go. That's the final word for today.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.